This interview is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This interview was originally conducted in October of 1970. The interview is conducted by Mr. Pendleton Woods. The interviewee is Mr. Hyatt, that's H-I-E-A-T-T, N. Arnold of Edmond, Oklahoma. This interview is being re-recorded on October the 25th, 1985, for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
This is Penn Woods interviewing for the Oklahoma Living Legends. I'm visiting with Mr. H.N. Arnold. That's Hyatt, N-H-I-E-A-T-T, N. Arnold. Usually goes by H.N. Arnold, isn't that correct? Mr. Arnold, I think to start that I'd like for you to hold the mic fairly close, about like I am here, and tell a little bit about where you were born, who your parents were, and when you came to Oklahoma, or if you were born in Oklahoma, where in Oklahoma you were.
No, I was born in Edna, Kansas in 1893. Lived at most of my life and through the Common High School at Anthony, Kansas, graduating from there in 1914. In 1917, I moved to northwest Oklahoma in Harper County.
Who were your parents?
My parents was C.C. Arnold and my mother Susie E. Arnold, both from Kentucky.
You came at the age of 17 to Harper County.
No, in the year 17.
In
In the year
you were
1917.
25
About,
years ago.
no. Is that running?
Yes, sir.
Let's see, that is from Oklahoma.
Were you in the 1st Oklahoma Infantry?
No, I was in the officers' training school at Camp Pike, Arkansas. And afterwards, after graduation, assigned back to the school.
I see. You were never assigned to a division.
No, it was the ICOTS at Pike.
That's now Camp Robinson, Arkansas. Is that correct?
That's right.
You spent most of World War I then at Camp Pike.
Holy.
Holy at Camp Pike. Did you come back to Harper County after you graduated? After you were discharged?
Yes, and stayed there until
After you were married, I understand, during the period of World War I. Who were you married to?
Married to Ora Ann Randalls of Enid.
How many children did you have?
None.
No children. Now, you came back to Harper County after World War I. What business did you go into at that time?
Originally, when I went to Harper County, I was in the mercantile business. From that, I went into the Ford business and had 3 contracts in northwest Oklahoma. And I was in that business when I come to Oklahoma City as a member of the Highway Commission.
Now, that was the T-model Ford at that time.
That was the T-model.
Now, there weren't very many paved roads in that western Oklahoma at that time, were there?
There wasn't even a concrete bridge. They were all wooden bridges, and they were very few of them was even graded roads. To get to Enid, we had to go up through Kansas. We'd go north, cross the bridge in Kansas, go into protection through Medicine Lodge, and then break south, coming into Enid. There was nowhere you couldn't get across the Cimarron there in Oklahoma. The state wasn't very old then.
What were some of the problems or experiences in selling automobiles of that vintage in a period with roads of that nature?
Well, if you'll remember, a Model T, and if my memory is correct, they sold for around $400. Now that would be, or it'd be less than that. It would be about, I would say, let's kill it a minute, let me figure that. What was the question now?
Some of the problems or experiences of selling automobiles in what is really the early days of automobiles and of roads.
Well, the natural desire of everyone wanted one to start with, so it was not a question of selling them. Although the roads were bad, the car was built for bad roads. It was a high clearance. It was a small tire. It was the Model T. It was a bad road car. So that didn't enter into it. It was a question of money at those days.
And the car sold for about $295 for the
The
road.
cheapest model would sell for $295. Now, in the beginning, you bought the windshield extra, and these were all extras on it. You'd buy the raw car without the starter in a 30-by-3 tire. Now, that's not a very big tire. For about $300.
Now, without the starter, I mean, you crank the car.
You cranked the car. So you had your cloth top, of course, with side curtains. But the Roadster would sell for, I think, $295. The first of the Model A's. Sold for $625 with complete. It was not a matter of selling the automobile. It was if the money was available. That was the only.
I think that's probably true today. And I suspect being in the automobile business gave you some background for your highway department work a little later, isn't that correct?
Well, yes, and of course I had a viewpoint of the average person who lived out in the state and wanting roads because we wanted them and we was constantly down here trying to get them. And I did know firsthand the feeling of the average citizen in the state regarding that.
Now you went into the ranching business in that same area, didn't you?
Yes, by virtue of the automobile business.
How did that come about?
Well, in those days, we'd trade for horses, mules, and cows. We traded for anything, especially when the Fortune tractor when it began to kind of take place of the animal. We had to trade for that. Well, you'd start you'd trade for this, and you'd put it out on grass, and you just gradually grew into the ranching business, which was the one that I enjoyed more than any of them.
You were ranching in Harper County. What were you raising?
Hereford.
Hereford. How many Herefords did you have?
Well, I had two outfits. I had about 200 head of registered cows, and the steer crop that you bought and sold varied entirely according to the weather conditions and the condition of your grass.
Do you feel that there were any particular problems in the ranching business at that time, different from today, that would be worth mentioning?
Well, I would think it would be easier in one respect that science and medical aid has greatly enhanced the possibilities of not having your losses that we had in those days. On the other hand, I understand from talking to the different boys that are still in that business that the labor situation is exceedingly difficult.
Did you have any epidemic losses during
No.
that period? Were there in other areas during the period you were ranching any epidemic losses in the Hereford business?
No, we had minor ones, of course. The biggest epidemic, or the biggest loss that I can remember was a freeze west of us in the Panhandle of Texas. I was going out to not Canadian, but a point in Texas, and it was right after the big freeze, and cattle will naturally drift away from the storm. They'll come to a fence, and the first ones can't pass, so the back ones just keep coming and keep coming and keep coming until they tromp them to death. Now, the idea is to go ahead of your herd, cut those fences and let them drift. Well, all the way out there, this was a fast storm. They hadn't done that, and they were skinning. And I wouldn't hesitate to say the number of dead animals that you'd see just going down the road.
Now you, how long were you in the ranching business there?
Well, up till I was in ranching business up till about 49.
You had the ranch, but you did move to Oklahoma City.
Moved to Oklahoma City.
What brought you to Oklahoma City?
Well, I sold my holdings there. I turned it off now in a minute.
Mr. Arnold, I believe you served on the board of regents of both OU and A&M colleges, which is rather unusual for the same person to have served on those two boards at different times.
I think I'm the only one in the state that has done that.
You served on the regents. What years did you serve on the two, and under which governors?
I served the years I don't remember, but I served under. I was appointed on the board of regents of the university under Jack Walton. I served 2 years on the board of regents at the A&M College, what was then A&M College, under William H. Murray.
Who was president of what's now Oklahoma State University, then Oklahoma A&M at the time you were on the board?
Dr. Henry G. Bennett.
He was certainly one of the prominent Oklahomans, and you, I understand, became a very close friend of Dr. Bennett. Is that correct?
That's correct.
I wonder if there are any personal experiences with Dr. Bennett, or any observations that you might have had, particularly from personal experience, that might be of interest to this.
One in particular. I think Dr. Bennett can be given credit, and justly so, for all of the physical construction and progress that Oklahoma State has made. One of my first remembrances of him is showing me a map or diagram in the location of each of the buildings that he hoped and intended to build. I really must frankly admit that I thought it was a fantasy to think for him to think that he could accomplish this. But before his death, 95% of it had been accomplished.
Dr. Bennett was himself actually a very good politician, which a person would need to be in order to be able to get out of state government what was needed to build what they did. Could you comment on his influence in this regard?
Dr. Bennett was an unusual gentleman. He was brilliant. He was the most pleasing personality I've ever known any person to possess. He was quiet. He didn't take issue. Time was of no consequence to him in accomplishing anything he undertook. And he, I might say, could say no without knowing, the person not knowing it till after for 2 or 3 hours afterwards, more easily than anyone I ever knew. He was dedicated to that school. He had, when he was appointed, there was political opposition to him. He come from Durant up there. And as I said before, I think there isn't any question about it that he can justly be said to be the builder of that school.
Can you think of any, other than what you've mentioned, any particular incidences that might give us any insight to either his personality or his influence?
Well, his influence was great because, if you will remember, he was appointed by the president on the, and he set up in Ethiopia. Point 4 program. He was the director of the Point 4 program, and it was commonly understood that after he had completed this job that he was supposed to be appointed Secretary of Agriculture in the cabinet.
And he, of course, was killed while on that job.
His Mrs. Bennett, he had told me before on a trip just a few days before he made the trip that Mrs. Bennett had always wanted to spend Christmas in the Holy Lands, and that he was making this trip. Then he was going to discontinue that and come back here and either take back the active presidency. And this was his last trip that he run, that his plane flew into the mountain.
Is there any? Are there any experiences as a part of the A&M colleges that you feel might be of any particular importance? Some of the problems that you all may have had in the A&M colleges during your period on the board.
Yes, it was during the era of semi-depression. It was an effort was made up there. A big effort was made at the college to provide cheap education for the underprivileged. I know that housing, and it was cafeteria work, that kind, was comparatively new in those days. And Dr. Bennett was particularly interested in putting a college education at the reach of any and all Oklahomans. They endeavored to build several self-help industries in the school, comparable then to Berea and now to the School of the Ozarks. In addition to that, he was constantly improving and upgrading the faculty along with his physical construction.
Can you think of any, now you were involved with the other A&M colleges too, weren't you, at that time?
Well, they were not necessarily all A&M colleges. Now, Panhandle was an A&M college. And it was a 2-year college, and during that time went to a 4-year. Now, Warner and Murray and Cameron were semi-agricultural college, but they were under the control of the Board of Agriculture.
Did you have any problems in these other colleges, or any situations that might be worth mentioning, or any experiences?
No, I think they were junior colleges, and in those days the problems was not confronted by the educational system that they have today, and I think you'd say they just progressed rather smoothly.
Your next commission or appointed position was under Governor Murray. Is that correct?
Yes, I was appointed on the Board of Agriculture, which is the Board of Regents for these schools. I served 2 years on the Board of Agriculture and then was appointed to the Highway Commission.
Governor Murray, of course, is one of, I suspect without any question, the most colorful of all of the politicians in the history of the state of Oklahoma, and will probably always be known as the most colorful, but in many ways also, in many respects, a controversial individual, certainly a brilliant individual. I wonder if you would, to start with, tell about your first meeting or your first association with Governor Murray. I know it was before he was governor.
Governor Murray had come back from Bolivia and started his campaign for the governorship because of a favor he had done for me when he was in Congress. I agreed to travel with him through the 8th Congressional District. And I picked him up here at Oklahoma City, starting for Boise City. They were going to start at Boise City and come east. I'll never forget the introduction I had to him was when he got in the car, he told me that, cut it a minute, let me figure this out.
Mr. Arnold, you just told me when we were visiting about your first encounter with Governor Bill Murray, which I think is tremendous and is something that ought to be recorded. I hope you'll tell it to me on tape.
Because of a favor that the old governor had done for me when he was a congressman, and when he returned from Bolivia and started his campaign for the governorship, I agreed to travel with him through the 8th Congressional District. I picked him up at the Bristol Hotel here in Oklahoma City. And my introduction to him was when he got in the car, he told me that he was tired, he wanted to rest, and he didn't want me mouthing off all the time on the trip. He didn't like people that wanted to do all the talking. And he'd let me know when he wanted to talk. Well, naturally, his introduction wasn't greatly appreciated, and most certainly we drove from there to Enid without either one of us saying a word. I let him out at Enid, tended some business he wanted to, and picked him up at a given time, and started for Alva. We got to Alva, and neither one of us had said a word. Drove up in front of the restaurant at Alva at dinner time, and I told him there's a good place to eat. He went on in, had his dinner, come out of the restaurant. We started west toward Buffalo, where we intended to spend the night. He asked me a question about the country, which I knew, but I told him I didn't. And this happened 2 or 3 times, and he finally told me that he didn't think I was very smart if I'd lived in the country that long and couldn't answer a simple question like that. And I couldn't resist reminding him that he wasn't the only person in the world who reserved the right to talk when he wanted to and wanted people to keep their damn mouth shut when he didn't want to talk. He looked at me a minute, and up to this time, he was riding in the back seat. And he come crawling over that seat. From that time on, as long as I knew him, or as long as he lived, we were very fine friends.
I think this is a very interesting insight on Governor Murray. Now, could you tell a little bit about your travels with him? I understood you started off to work just one congressional district, but ended up going all of them with him. Could you tell a little about that trip?
I went the entire west half of the state. And on the east side, I was in and out of that because of business things that had to be tended to. But the west side, I was with him over the entire west side and was with him on every trip he made to the west side while he was governor.
In history, we read about that as about Governor Murray's campaign as being the cheese and crackers campaign. I've read that term several times. Is this a correct term, or would you enlarge on the comment of history?
The cheese and cracker campaign is not that simple. The campaign all centered around what was the Blue Valley Farmer, and it was a free publication of I think it was an 8-page paper, full-size, 7-column paper. It went free to every to the entire population of the state, and in those days, that was an expensive item. There was more money spent in the William H. Murray campaign, and because he was running against Frank Buttram, who with the support of all the press, and there was more money spent in the campaign than the cheese and crackers would indicate.
Could you tell a little about the Blue Valley Farmer?
It was edited by a very fine writer by the name of Sheldon. Let's see.
That's good enough. That's
But the name was Sheldon. I've known few people who could put out a better propaganda sheet. He had his baptism, I think, during the farmer labor days in Dakota, and had come from there here. He was a native of this state, but he come from there here and took over the Murray publication.
One of his principal opposition, one of the organizations that he fought over the years, I remember from reading his 3-volume history that he wrote, and the one that he seemed to be his greatest antagonist and he with was, of course, the Oklahoman Times. Could you comment on the running feud that he apparently had with the Oklahoman Times over the years?
Not with any degree of authority, whatever. I knew only what was common knowledge to everybody, that they seemed to have vastly different opinions.
You all didn't discuss that?
No, it's needless for me to say that anything that he said to me was, of course, uncomplimentary, but that was a matter of which I knew very little about.
This was a little later, but you said that he generally did not tend to pay compliments. You told me his term, but that he did pay you one in a book later. The terminology he used when talking about paying compliments to people was what? You told us about this when we were visiting.
He told me on several occasions that he complimented nobody, not even his own children, that they knew, and they knew that if they had lived up to their expectations on what they were doing without him buttering them up.
However, I did read the little epitaph that he wrote in this book to you personally, and what did that epitaph say? Do you recall?
I think it said, "For help given me during my term as governor."
I think he also said a very fine aid. Isn't that correct?
I think that's right.
The swinging into Governor Murray, there are many facets of feeling about him because of the different people who approached him at different times, and he had a way of sometimes dealing with certain types of personalities in certain ways. Would you discuss this a little bit? You're talking about, for instance, a stuffed shirt, how he might deal there, how he might deal with someone who was beating around the bush too much and not getting into what he wanted, and some of these personal characteristics.
He was, Governor Murray was impatient with, very impatient with non-essentials. He's been, it's been heard that the old gentleman was ill-kept, not clean. This is absolutely wrong. I traveled with him during the campaigns. I traveled with him during all of his trips to the west side of the state. I knew he was immaculate with himself. Ms. Murray once on one of these trips asked me to see that the old governor changed his clothes. And I said, well, I don't know just how I can do that. And she told me it was very simple. All I had to do was pick when he had gone to bed, just pick his old ones up and lay the other ones out, that he'd put them on in the morning and he wouldn't know that he'd changed. Which, he was a person that formality, other than in government. Now, when it come to government, formality was necessary, but formality in ordinary everyday living, and a stuffed shirt or a demagogue or anything irritated him. And invariably, he would tell him a story that may be just a little off color, but it hit him right square between the eyes.
You had told of an experience dealing with a man and his school antics, I believe. Could you?
With his what?
I believe it was with his the one who was trying to explain the fact that he came here without anything. You recall that story? I believe that gives a little insight into Governor Murray.
One evening we were in the governor's office, and I was going over with him to the mansion for dinner. It was late, and the last person that he was to interview come in, and he was an elderly gentleman, nervous beyond words. He was kind of felt out of place in the governor's office, and he was asking a favor that might be a little embarrassing. And he evidently had framed up a speech that he wanted to make to the governor before he approached the subject that he was interested in, which was that when he come to Oklahoma, he only had 2 burros or 2 horses and a buggy. And he'd get about that far with his speech, and the governor would say, well, now, I don't care what you had when you come to Oklahoma. What do you want? Well, that made him more nervous, but he started right in with the beginning of the same thing again to tell the same story. And the governor stopped him again. And by that time, he was highly excitable and started right in on the same speech that he had again. And the governor stopped him again. Well, he was in an awful state of mind right then, and he made him mad, and he just jumped up and cussed the governor and walked out. After he's gone, the governor called his secretary and asked him to go down to the school land department and find out what the trouble was. And he come back and told the governor that his first past due payment on his school land he had received notice of it, and he was wanting to find out some way to get it deferred. Well, the governor says if that's all he wanted, why here, he just reached in his pocket and took the money out and paid it himself.
This is another good insight, I believe. Another thing that might be worth mentioning is his feeling when it came to some of the executions that took place during his period. Would you relate what you had told me earlier on that?
I was with him on several. Sometimes I didn't realize it at first, but I believe it was just company he wanted. And we'd have dinner at the mansion. And early in the evening, the warden would call to find out if there had been any change in the status of the execution. In the beginning, the old governor would tell him no, and then start in to discuss other penitentiary business with him. That in the beginning, the old governor would tell him no, and then start in to discuss other penitentiary business with him that they were familiar with and they wanted to. In a couple of hours, he'd call back, and the same procedure would go on. Now, as it neared the time for the execution, they called quite often. And the old governor would just, the last one in particular, would just have to say no and hang up the phone, and that's all there was to it. And I've noticed him many times when he was just wringing wet with perspiration after having to go through that.
I wonder if are there any other experiences that you can think of dealing with Governor Murray?
Well, I had a lot of conversation with him when I was on the board up to Stillwater. And as I look at it now, I kind of marvel at the insight he had. He felt that education, especially in the grade school and high school, should be emphasis put on teaching how to think, contending that mathematics, science would do this, or natural astronomy and stuff of this kind would make you think. Now, history, spelling, reading, courses that kind were memory courses. he felt that more emphasis should be put on teaching a student to think. That that there should be a relationship between the return on the investment in the expenditure of funds in these schools. He felt that there should be one university patterned. He felt that there should be one university patterned after the school at Oxford School. And that this school should not have any athletics. It should have no Greek letter societies. That unlimited funds should be spent on it. That no one should make entrance to it who had not passed a terrific entrance examination. And that if necessary, that each student in there should be subsidized in the university. The A&M College should be continue as it is in the now form, but most of the other colleges should be converted to a 2-year technical school.
He had a lot of thoughts on education that have come out in some of the books and things that he has written. Can you? Are there any other thoughts he had on education that he might have related that you feel might be of interest?
No,
what he had published. Now you served on the Highway Commission under him. Is that correct? Could you tell about this experience?
Well, there's nothing. The state, we had 5 highway commissioners. The state was divided in 5 divisions. Naturally, each commissioner took care of his particular division. It was more or less routine with them. This was during the Depression. There wasn't a great lot of funds available, and it was during. Most of our construction was done with federal aid, and our funds was utilized mostly for maintenance. It was 6 years of which, for the time, great progress was made, and the old governor was enthusiastic in his support of that department.
You served 6 years on the commission.
Yes.
That overlapped into
Marlin's, Governor Marlin's administration.
Did you have any relationship with Governor Marlin?
No, not. I was a holdover appointee, and which didn't, in itself, lend to any much intimacy.
You are conscious both of the strengths and the weaknesses of Governor Murray. I wonder if you would give, from your observation, which is somewhat on the inside, kind of an evaluation of Governor Murray as you saw him.
Well, there's 2 pictures of Governor Murray. One that has been created by opposition to him politically. As everyone knows, that there isn't anything that will not be said or done in a campaign and to discredit anyone if the candidate is a potential winner. So you have the one side that was created by those who weren't particularly interested in him. Then you have his friends. Now they vary greatly. I was pleased to be classed as a friend. I think the governor was brilliant. I think he was dedicated most certainly to government and the state of Oklahoma in particular. I remember him repeatedly saying that a state could experiment in modernization where the federal government couldn't, for the reason the state, if it was a mistake, could recover, where the federal government never recovered from things of that kind. He was without doubt one of the finest constitutional lawyers that I think we have produced. He was the father of the Constitution of this state, and it's common knowledge that 3 or 4 years before the state convention, he almost went into seclusion and read the Constitution of every government in existence up to that time. Further proof that it was pretty good was the fact that it has been changed so little since that time till now. I forgot what you asked me. I got the wrong.
Well, I asked for an evaluation, kind of the strong and weak points that you saw.
I have mixed emotions about the old governor's. He would do things that would be what might be termed a little unbecoming of him, and then he'd turn around and insist and demand complete respect. For instance, if he would do something that would be that you would say would be unbecoming of a governor. Then he'd turn around and become infuriated if anyone addressed him as Mr. Murray. He wished to be addressed as Governor Murray, not because of him personally, but he thought that the office of governor demanded that respect. So he would. His personal appearance was one that you would naturally would like for him to have taken a little more care of, but that meant nothing to him. He would, on any subject that he was interested in, he mastered to the nth degree. He didn't stop any place with it. He went right through. He knew all about it. And if he couldn't do it that way, then he wasn't interested in the subject. He was strong. He had absolutely no respect for money. That was just a necessity. Government and law was his sole and practically his 100% interest.
Did he have many close, intimate friends?
Very few. McKeel, who was on the tax commission, was a close friend. I would hesitate to name him because he had a world of acquaintances and but intimates, not many.
He made a later try for the presidency. Did you have either any involvement or any close knowledge of that?
I was a member of the National Convention that he was a candidate in.
Why don't you tell us about that?
I know very little about it. I remember that at that time Governor Murray had much publicity over the nation as a whole. And those in charge of the convention, which was the Roosevelt forces, took particular pains that when the time set for the Governor Murray to address the convention was at 12 midnight. They set that up so they would. And there's one thing about Governor Murray that few people know, that he was William Jennings Bryan's right hand in the nomination of Woodrow Wilson.
Can you tell about that?
I do not know the details well enough to know, but at the time it happened, and while I knew the governor, there was many references to it, and but the details I've lost them.
Can you tell any more of the details of his experience at this national convention, how he went over and how he carried on a campaign?
Well, his campaign for the International Convention was largely like his campaign for governor. He was recognized, he was respected, and in a sense feared, because he had his publicity and he had and a favorable following. Of course, the only delegation that supported him there was a brother that was a member of the convention. I think he was from one of the Dakotas.
If he were running today, would you expect he would be a Democrat or a Republican or an American Party?
I would hesitate to answer that. I don't think he would. I don't think he would be considered 100% Democrat.
What influence do you think he had, if any, on the Johnson Murray administration? He was still living then.
Yes. I was not closely associated with the Johnson Murray administration, so I couldn't answer that with any sense of the degree of authority.
Are there any other thoughts that you feel we have not covered that we ought to on the Murray? Can you think of any later incidences beyond either in later politics or other things that you feel we ought to record?
I don't think we recall anything.
Well, this has been an interview with Mr. H.N. Arnold for the Oklahoma Living Legends. This interview was made at Oklahoma Christian College. This is October 1970. Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold.